Please, make it stop. Our guns are silent. Our worlds are yours. We surrender with no conditions, just please make it stop. Those were the last words of the Friend Empire. Their desperate plea still echoes in the void, amidst the static of cosmic background radiation. You can hear the lingering despair in the voice of their once emperor as he watched the stars fade from his domain. It's easy to dismiss the small things when you're surrounded by the monumental void craft the size of small moons, burning like torches in the night sky, igniting atmospheres as they vent from their shattered hulls. It's easy to ignore the tiny details when oceans boil and stars shatter in the anvil of war. But in the end, it's the little things that get you. The Ind's Pale was one such little thing, a relic built shortly after the Tan Age of Unification, not in some orbital shipyard but on the surface of Terra herself. A mere 100 meters from stern to bow, less than 30 from port to starboard, and light enough to reach escape velocity under the power of her ancient chemical engines. Originally constructed as a small cargo freighter to transport liquid water from Terra to the pale wastes of Luna, back when Terra still had water, she was devoid of weapon systems, kinetic launchers, ballistics, or even a grav drive. As the technology was still experimental at the time of her creation. By all rights, she should be in pieces, her body broken and recycled 1,000 times over, or perhaps on display under the bright lights of a museum. Yet instead, she lay abandoned and forgotten in the drift amidst the stars, her voyage through the current of interstellar gravity having brought her into orbit of Lyssa, a gas giant on the edge of imperial space, slowly sinking into its gravity well, waiting to be consumed by the thick yellow clouds that blanketed the world's upper atmosphere. From the Ion Karen's vantage point, she was nothing more than a smudge. "Is that it?" Captain Willard asked, squinting at the vessel on his screen. "Is that the ship that has you and the rest of the CPA agency so excited? The void ship that we're tossing to the Friends' war navy to tear apart? The ship that will be our salvation?" "Oh, trust me," Captain Agent Langley replied coldly, "that vessel will be nobody's salvation." "How long until we can board it?" Willard inquired. "One of our away crews is attaching external thrusters to it as we speak. They should be done in a couple of hours, then a few hours more to attach the tethers and pull her close. After that, it's just a matter of convincing the airlock protocols of the Karen to play nice with that ancient tech." "I don't know how long that's going to take," Langley replied. Willard flicked his prosthetic hand, zooming in on the video feed of the Ind's Pale. "Why do you need my Karen to tow that relic? Why am I here in the middle of nowhere with you when the rest of Strike Force Ars Ares is fighting on the front lines?" Langley didn't miss a beat. "Do you know how extensive the archives of Terra are, Captain? All records, all books, municipal plans, vessel registrations, everything is recorded and kept in those archives. Legions of scribes dedicate their entire lives, from adulthood until their last breath, to recording everything in the Imperium into those archives. The data forts containing them span entire ocean floors across multiple worlds. There's backup storage in orbit and in secret locations in the middle of the interstellar void. We even have backups of the backups, in the form of QR codes carved on slabs of titanium on barren moons most don't even know exist, in case everything else fails. The sum of Terran knowledge, from the age of unification to now, is kept in those archives. And the Crypta is the only organization in the entire Imperium that has access to them. Not even the Imperator himself can access what we have. Among those archives is a certain record, a manifest of the Pale's last shipment before she went dark. Yet, strangely, the Pale herself isn't in our records. The scribes must have made a mistake. Or maybe the Crypta did," Willard said, confused. "How can there be a manifest for a vessel's cargo, but not the vessel itself?" Langley tilted his head, as if Willard should know better than to ask such questions. "What was she carrying?" Willard asked, knowing it was futile. Langley gave him a knowing look in return. "Let me know as soon as we can board the vessel, Captain. And remember, only my team has accessed the alloy of the ancient ship strained as the Karen's tethers started pulling it. If it weren't for the cold vacuum of the void, you could almost hear the hull scream in agony as it fought to stay in one piece, the claws of the Ion Charon pulling it one way, the gravity of Lyssa pulling it another. Slowly, the giant winches buried deep within the Karen's engineering decks won the battle, pulling the ancient Pale into the Karen's embrace. The thrusters activated, gently guiding the vessel toward one of the many umbilical connectors, like a sea ship drifting into a safe harbor. From the observation windows overlooking the umbilical, the Pale's age really showed. Its hull was scarred by micrometeorite impacts and scorched by centuries of cosmic radiation. The very lettering of its name was almost faded away beneath the scars and scorch marks. Yet there was something more peculiar about it. The void ship looked off, as if not everything was exactly right with it. It resembled a vessel of its era, sure, but the details were wrong, as if it had been hastily copied, then copied again and again, with errors accumulating with each transcription. The vessel was warped. As the umbilical connected and the protocols of the two vessels synchronized, a cacophony of low-atmosphere warnings blared through the PA system of the Charon, and the airlocks begrudgingly cycled. Shades of orange warning lights bathed Langley and his crew as the thrusters of their exosuits pushed them inside the pale. Mere meters from the entrance, the pitch-black interior swallowed them whole. Even the beams of their flashlights could only carve out a tiny bit of visibility from within the darkness. Willard only had access to the telemetry of Langley and his team's exosuits. No video, no audio, only their heartbeats, the condition of the environment surrounding them, and a host of other miscellaneous metadata. The heartbeats were stable, as one would expect from trained agents of the crypta, but the environmental scans showed something different. They picked up heat emanating from the vessel, even though all its systems had gone cold for millennia. They detected fluctuations in the pressure around them, even though the vessel's atmosphere had been vented through countless holes that perforated its length. Most strangely of all, the exosuit telemetry returned geometric data that suggested the Pale's interior stretched for 102 meters from stern to bow, while external scans had measured it at exactly 100. Willard went through the readings again and again across all of Langley's crew's suits. One faulty suit was a possibility, two was unlikely, but 5 different exosuits bringing back the same erroneous readings. Impossible. Yet so were the readings themselves. From the console tracking their locations, Willard saw them split up. 2 of them headed to the bridge, the rest toward the engineering deck. None were heading to the cargo bay. Willard wanted to raise Langley on the radio to ask what they were looking for, but he knew the only answer he would get would be silence. Suddenly, alarms on 3 of the exosuits went off, those that had headed toward the engineering deck. Elevated heart rates, erratic breathing, cortisol levels spiking, adrenaline too. It seemed like all 3 of them were having heart attacks at the same time. More than that, the gravitic readings were going crazy too, bouncing between several G differences from one moment to the next. Willard had only seen such readings on vessels about to initiate a grav jump. Before he could dispatch a medic squad to go after the crypta agents, a call came from Langley's radio: prepare medical assistance at the airlock. Do not board the Pale. I repeat, do not board the Pale. Captain Willard obeyed Langley's orders, yet every second that passed without the wounded appearing in the airlock, he considered harder and harder how bad it would be to get court-martialed for disobeying a crypta agent. Eventually, Willard saw 2 figures emerge from the ship. The darkness that enveloped them now spit them out. Between them, they were carrying their unconscious colleague. The medical team quickly laid him on a stretcher, tying him down for transportation to the infirmary. Willard managed to catch a glimpse of the agent's exosuit patches while the medics prepared them for transport. He had to look again and again to make sure he was seeing right. The patches were wrong. Not only were they wrong, but the letters and numbers on the agent's insignia were scrambled. Soon after, the other 2 agents appeared, Langley among them. Put him in isolation. Only my team talks to him, Langley ordered. Willard flew at Langley at the sound of orders. What the hell is in there? He almost shouted. Hell, came the distorted answer from Langley's suit voice modulator. I should put you all in quarantine, Willard said, spite sharpening his voice. Scuttle the damn thing, you will do no such thing, Captain Langley continued. Not because you know the crypta overrides your authority, but because you've seen how this war goes. You've seen our legions shatter. You've seen the Sword of Azrael, the flagship of Strike Force Apollon, crash on the surface of Line Delta. You've seen the burning ruins of Hyposper. You know what lies beyond that airlock is our only hope, even if you don't know what it is. Captain Willard stood silent. The crypta agent was right. The entire deck is off limits to everyone, including the crypta, he announced to the gathered crewmen. I hope you have everything you needed from that ship, Agent Langley, because you aren't getting anywhere near it again. Langley nodded. We have what we need for now. You will know when we need to cross the Pale's threshold again, and you yourself will open the locks for us. Over the coming days, the Ion Charon moved away from Lissa's gravity well to where it was safe for them to grav jump out of the star system. During that time, Willard found himself drawn to the relic of a vessel. At first, he would simply spend time gazing at it, minutes at first, then hours. Then the entire day would pass, and he would be transfixed by its sight, observing it from the engineering deck near the umbilical the Pale was attached to. Even as the artificial lights dimmed to simulate nightfall on the Charon, the vessel seemed to almost beckon him, pulling him toward it. He studied her every detail, every mark, every bolt, every visible weld on her hull, every subtle way it was altered from its original form. Sometimes it seemed as if that distortion extended beyond the Pale's hull, as if the light of the stars around it was bending, like the Voidcraft was a miniature black hole tugging at space and time itself. It was at those times when the captain could almost hear the voice of the Pale calling to him in a language without words, telling him to get inside, to cross the threshold of its airlock. With every day that passed, the voice grew louder. He nearly heeded that voice more than once, finding himself making his way through the engineering deck, past the station guards, into the umbilical connector. Each time, he stopped a few steps away from the airlock control panel, something within him screaming not to go further, something primordial, louder than the voice of the Pale, though every time it seemed that the Pale's call grew louder and the voice within him grew fainter. There was, without a doubt, something about the Pale, something beyond Willard's ability to explain. Yet, at first glance, it was such a small and insignificant thing, a tiny vessel, barely worthy of the title void ship. When he wasn't near the vessel, Willard spent his time in the medbay outside the comatose agent's room. Willard couldn't talk to him, even if he wanted to, as the agent had slipped into a full coma since being pulled from the Pale. Instead, Willard spent his time combing through the medical readings. Most of them made absolutely no sense. His heart fluctuated between beating normally and at heart attack levels. Various screenings of his blood returned results that shouldn't be exhibited in a living human. Yet most strangely of all, his brainwave readings often appeared doubled, as if there were two brains trapped inside his one skull. Any questions regarding the agent's condition were met with condescending and fake assurances from the rest of the crypta that he was fine. The effects of the Pale's distortion didn't confine themselves to its immediate vicinity and to the agent, however. Like a disease, the distortion of the Pale spread across the Karen. With each passing day, the crew grew more restless, irritable, and almost paranoid. More and more couldn't get restful sleep long enough to dream, and those that did whispered of the things they saw in their bunks, dreams of uncanny, prophetic visions, grotesque and obscene fates. Dreams that woke them screaming and panting in their sweat-covered sheets. Dreams of the universe bleeding. It wasn't long before hallucinations followed them into their waking life, an altered image in the mirror, an instrument reading that made no sense, an object appearing where it shouldn't be, a hallway that was slightly longer or shorter with each passage. Disorientation set in, with crew members finding themselves down dead-end corridors that hadn't been there before, opening doors to bulkheads that seemed to now materialize out of nothing. Eventually, nothing seemed right anymore, not the texture of their skin, the taste of their gums, the features on their faces, or their reflections in the mirror. Nothing made sense. Soon, irritability and paranoia took physical form. The hallucinations and dreams seemed to affect the Karen at a geometric rate. The crew stationed on the decks in closest proximity to the Pale suffered the most severe effects, those who had to sleep and work closer to it. Among them, fights broke out over the most minuscule things, duties went unobserved, and only the threat of punishment from officers still clinging to their sanity kept a semblance of order. Those further away still suffered the symptoms of the Pale's distortion, albeit in a less severe manner. The dreams were less frequent, the visions less severe, but for them too, the whispers grew louder as they had for the crews of the lower decks. Perhaps that was even worse in a sense, having a clear vision of what was to come and no control over it. It was only the 4 crypta agents that seemed wholly unaffected by what was happening on that cursed void ship. The Pale, it was all because of the Pale. Wherever it had traveled to, whatever it had brought back, it was tearing at the minds of the crew, driving them insane. Willard was certain of as much, yet there was nothing he could do. He envisioned cutting it loose from the Karen's tethers, letting it drift into the void, or turning the Karen's guns on it, transforming it into stardust. Then there were other thoughts that didn't belong to him. Thoughts that he had to protect the Pale, keep it safe, alive. He saw it as his child, as part of him. A vortex of duality clouded his mind into inaction, leaving the Pale to fester and spread its poison on the Karen. By the time the Karen was in position to engage its grav drives and jump, the crew was on the brink of descending into anarchy. Paranoia was law. Shadows whispered in the ears of crewmen, and visions of hell flickered at the edge of their eyes. Some decided to end it on their own terms, hanging themselves from bulkheads, slicing across their wrists in bloody pools, or simply turning their guns on themselves. For the rest, violence had become inevitable, and brutal skirmishes broke out among the crew on the lower deck. Service weapons, knives, crude makeshift spears, anything heavy enough to crush through a Terran's skull was utilized to lethal effect. Executions became a standard form of discipline. Gunshots echoed every few hours, and the corridors of the engineering decks were stained in red and coagulated brain matter, too thick to be washed away. The violence, too, was inching closer to the bridge at a geometric rate. It It was only a matter of time before the bridge crew was assaulted by the fermenting anarchy of the lower decks, or they succumbed to the madness themselves. Captain Willard, a haggard and sleepless shell of his normal self, managed to drag himself from the observation window that overlooked the Pale into the Charon's bridge to oversee the jump process. Agent Langley stood beside him. Powering up the plasma shields came the voice of a bridge crewman. Spinning the Einstein coils, another called out. Main grav drive is up and powered. Auxiliary gravs powering up. The callouts continued. Diagnostics are wrong, a voice from further down the bridge said. One officer rose from his station and stood at attention in front of Captain Willard. Captain, systems diagnostics are indicating malfunction. Protocol recommends postponing the jump. The officer's voice was strained. He was still sane enough to know the protocol and when to ignore it. He knew that whatever was happening to him and the rest of the crew needed to stop, and the only way to do so was to finish the mission, to jump out of the system and into hostile territory, where the Pale would finally be released. Still, duty demanded he recite the protocol to his captain, and so he did. Willard looked over to Langley. He already knew what the agent would say. He himself knew the jump couldn't be postponed. All Langley did was slightly nod. Malfunctions are acceptable under the current circumstances. Take us into the jump, he said. The bridge officer walked back to his station and gave a final set of orders to his men. Moments later, the jump initiated. The stars around the vessel were swallowed by the void, and reality itself began to collapse. The force of gravity magnified by entire orders of magnitude. Even with the Einstein coils compensating for the flux in gravity, everyone on board the Charon felt like the thumb of God himself was pressing down on them. The blackness of the void disappeared, and the Charon became enveloped in true nothingness. No colors outside the observation windows, no signals from the instruments, pure non-existence, pure liminality. The Charon was now in the jump, the space between space. It was the first time Willard noticed how absolute the nothingness was during a jump. It was the first time Willard noticed anything at all during a jump. Normally, the perception of time and space was dulled for the duration of a jump, a fraction of a blink, and you were in another star system, hundreds of thousands of light years away. A standard physiological response all sentient beings seemed to share, not just Terrans. Yet this time, Willard could sense everything. The nothingness slowly turned into something, a chaotic blend of horrific visions, drenched in blood and fire, echoes of the grotesque dreams and hallucinations the crew had suffered in the days leading up to this moment. Willard saw himself unraveling and folding back in on himself, countless times over, his very being now a never-ending fractal. All realities, those that were possible and those that were not, merged and coalesced into one. The glimpses of unreality he had peeked at in the days past now engulfed his consciousness, filling every corner of his mind. The firmament was finally torn, and all the horror flooded in at once. A billion stars bled and screamed in the void as they collapsed into a single instance, a singularity of madness and chaos. Then, with the same jarring suddenness, the nothingness faded away, and reality snapped back into stark focus. They had dropped out of the jump and into the periphery of the besieged Enceladus star system. Willard thought he would scream his lungs raw, tear out his own eyes with his bare hands, but instead, he, along with everyone else on the bridge, found themselves utterly unable to move, unable to speak. They simply stood there, staring at the silent stars and the cold void. "It is time," Langley said to Willard, breaking the oppressive silence that had gripped them. "It is time to cross the threshold, to end the mission." Nodding was all Willard could manage as he accompanied Langley and his team of crypto agents down the corridors of the Charon. A strange calm had befallen the vessel. Amidst the scorch marks on the walls and the dried blood underfoot, it seemed almost surreal not to hear gunshots or paranoid screams. Why, Willard finally managed to ask, his voice weak and strained. Why is this happening? The madness, the death? I have trusted in the Imperium, in the crypta, in the mission for long enough. I need to know. Each word left his lips with agony, his mind still clouded by the visions of what could not be. Do you know how grav drives work? Langley asked. Do you know even the basics of the mechanisms that propel your void ship through space and time? Willard considered the question for a moment. He knew the theory behind it. Grav drives increase the gravitational forces surrounding the vessel, amassing energy that trends toward infinity around it. The concentration of energy punches a hole through the universe, allowing the ship to slide between space to where it needs to be. But the mechanics behind it. Do you know how they work? Langley pressed. Willard pondered once more before answering. No, he finally admitted. That's because nobody does, Langley replied. Not the Imperium of Terra, not the Friend Empire, not even the Sari Ascendancy. The galaxy makes use of them, can manufacture them, or at least a version that suits their needs, but nobody truly understands them. This technology is inherited, gifted, or even stolen, but to our knowledge, it is never invented. Like a force of nature, all star civilizations eventually come into its possession, albeit nobody knows how or why. Langley continued. Willard had never thought about it before, but it was true. He had received training on how every system of a modern voidcraft worked as part of his duties as captain. He knew the mechanisms governing the operation of directed energy weapons, kinetic throwers, ballistic missiles, point defense cannons, plasma shielding, nuclear reactors, and void thrusters. But when it came to the grav drive, he only held a vague idea of the theory behind it, and so did everyone else he knew, be it fellow captains, officers, or engineers. Our first grav drives were stolen ones, Langley explained. We salvaged them from the void craft of the Ishar that invaded Terra during the first contact. We reverse-engineered them and produced crude copies of this technology we could scarcely comprehend. During the prototyping stage, we made several iterations of the grav drive, installed them as auxiliary components in the engineering of cargo freighters, and sent them on test voyages. Most of the time, our alterations to the grav drive technology failed to operate entirely. In other instances, they caused catastrophic failures, completely wrecking the test voidcraft. Exactly once, it resulted in the vessel that was carrying it to completely disappear. The INS Ashen made it to the Orc cloud of the Sol system on its conventional engines when it engaged its prototype version of the grav drive for the first time, Langley continued. For the first few moments, everything seemed normal. Energy readings were nominal. The Einstein coils were engaged. It looked like it would be a successful test. Then, in the blink of an eye, the readings went haywire. Gravitic fluctuations several thousand times higher than they should have been. An energy burst resembling the beam of a pulsar star, and then nothing. The Ashen was gone. Searches were conducted, of course. The nascent Imperium sent drones using more conventional versions of the grav drives to the intended target systems of the test voyage, as well as to the star systems near it. Multispectral scans of all sorts were deployed, from searching for the grav drive's signature to scouring the particle background of that area of the galaxy, looking for the outline of the Ashen's hull. Nothing was ever discovered. The test was deemed a failure, and the Imperium moved on. At the same time, however, something interesting was happening on our mining colonies on Pluto and in the asteroid belt. The population was becoming paranoid, reporting strange dreams and hallucinations. Reality itself was twisting and bending in front of them until the situation devolved into chaos. As you can imagine, as you have seen for yourself, a population suffering from mass paranoia has only one way to go, and that is down. The Imperium tried to quell the situation using regular means. The infant versions of the astral legions we know today were deployed under the guise of suppressing a xenophilic rebellion. In reality, they were supposed to put down a population gone mad. Alas, insanity is contagious, it seems, because those troops deployed began exhibiting the same exact symptoms of insanity. The situation spiraled to the point where the Imperium had no solutions except for the ultimate solution. We turned Pluto into glass, wiped several dozen asteroid colonies from existence. But the madness finally stopped. You mean to tell me that what happened here also happened? Then Willard choked on his words. There is no cure other than euthanasia. Hardly, Langley replied. The grav drive of the Pale was dormant. What we experienced here was but the residual effects of its activation almost 1,000 years ago. Every time a grav drive is activated, it tears through reality. Our grav drives make a tiny prick through its veil, just large enough for a voidcraft to pass through. The prototype on the Ashen, on the other hand, ripped reality to pieces for a territory of several million cubic kilometers of the void. When the hole is small, it patches itself back up. Nothing slips between the cracks, but when it's big enough, it can't be mended so easily, and the things that are contained on the other side, the things that turn sane men to madness, they come pouring in. And you plan to activate it again in the Enceladus system, the captain asked. That is exactly correct, Langley replied with a tone of barely concealed excitement. The Enceladus system, then the Borealis system, then the Borealis system, then the Folk, all the way to the heart of the Fren Empire. Still, Willard couldn't understand. Why? Why did it have to be the Pale? Why did we have to recover it? He was now on the verge of tears as the reality of what had happened, of what was still happening, settled in. Almost 1,000 years ago, the INS Ashen disappeared from our galaxy, never to be found again, leaving a rippling tidal wave of insanity in its wake. In its place, in the system where its test voyage was supposed to conclude, the INS Pale appeared. The Ashen and the Pale are unique, Langley explained. Nothing like them has ever been constructed before or since, even though we have tried. The grav drives in them, one constructed on our Terra, our reality, and the other in a Terra parallel to this one, are unique. Their design couldn't be replicated, their construction couldn't be copied. But it could be altered. When we boarded the Pale, we modified its grav drive, powered it down just enough so we could skip along the surface of our reality before crossing the veil. We have calculated the jumps needed. We will skip along the Friend's strategic star systems. And then we will see what the crew of the Inn's Ashen saw all those years ago. So we use it as a weapon. Then Willard finally understood. In front of the airlock, he felt the pull of the Pale again, its beckoning, its whispers, its malignancy still gripping him like a cancer. He was all too familiar with the dissonance that gripped him once again. He wanted to cut it off, be rid of it, and at the same time, he felt like he would be amputating a part of himself. Langley grabbed his shoulder. "I know," he said. "I feel it too." "I hear the whispers." Then how? Willard asked. "How do you resist it?" Langley shook his head. "I do not. None of us do." He gestured to his team. When our ancestors first discovered the power of the atom millennia ago, they did not know what its energy could do to them. They did not know of the radiation that could break them apart molecule by molecule, that could strip their flesh from their bones. The bomber pilots that first deployed those atomic weapons didn't know what they were risking with every flight. We do. We have accepted its call. And we will ride it to the other side. Langley stepped through the impenetrable darkness of the Pale's threshold once more, along with the rest of the crypta, for the final time. The airlock cycled closed. The Pale's engines sparked to life, and then, as if it were just any other vessel, it pulled away from the cairn and into the void. Willard watched as the Pale accelerated on its ancient thrusters towards the Friend Navy blockade on Enceladus 3B, still transfixed by the vessel, the faint whispers still clawing at his mind. He tapped into the broad-range communications of the blockading enemy fleet. They were amused at the Pale's sight, a tiny thing, a relic, insignificant and ignorable. Until, in the blink of an eye, their scans went haywire. Energy readings at the level of a pulsar star's beam were detected, and gravity fluctuated beyond comprehension for a vast territory of the void. And suddenly the Inn's Pale was gone. The Charon stayed there on the edge of the Enceladus system, listening to the frantic transmissions of the Friend Navy as they descended into madness. They made random pleas to gods and deities they hardly believed in, begged for mercy, for the insanity to stop, for the dreams to cease, for the whispers to go quiet. Then they begged for more, as they gave into it and embraced the madness, the visions from beyond the veil of this reality, as they tore at each other like rabid animals. Willard listened to the sound of gunshots across open communications channels, then the sound of flesh being rent apart when weapons were not enough to sate the frenzy. Their void craft opened fire on each other, their gun crews maniacally laughing as they tore each other to pieces. Even as their burning vessels streaked across the sky of Enceladus 3B in brilliant plumes of red, they continued laughing. It wasn't long before reports of similar frantic and insane transmissions started appearing across Friend space. The entire Friend Empire was descending into primordial chaos and insanity, first the fleets and the orbital stations in the void, then the transmissions from the surface of their worlds, as entire cities flooded their streets with the blood of their brothers, their sisters, their sons, and daughters. Please, please make it stop. Our guns are silent, our worlds are yours. We surrender with no conditions, just please make it stop, was the last transmission from their capital before the pleas for an end to the madness were drowned out by the slaughter and the laughter, the unending laughter. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says, we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.